Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
Welcome to a special Roundtable edition of L'Chaim. I'm Mark Golub, and I'm especially pleased to be joined by an outstanding panel of most thoughtful individuals to consider a number of the very troubling and complicated issues challenging Jewish life today and our general society and the world as a whole. In Israel, as we tape on Thursday afternoon, 4 Israelis were murdered, 2 in Tel Aviv, when a Palestinian from the West Bank stabbed Israelis to death as they entered a synagogue on the 2nd floor of an office building. A 3rd person was wounded in the attack. And in the Etzion block, 3 Jews, including an American yeshiva student, were murdered when a Palestinian in a car used a submachine gun to shoot at vehicles that were stopped in traffic and then crashed his car into another vehicle. In addition to the 3 murder victims, there were 6 other injuries, and 1 Palestinian was also a victim of the terrorist attack. At least 17 Israelis have been murdered by Palestinians who have used knives and guns and vehicles to kill Jews. Some suggest that the motivation behind the Palestinian attacks on Jews is the same ideology that led to the deadly jihadist attacks in Paris, in which ISIS terrorists murdered more than 125 people in a well-orchestrated series of attacks that some have called Paris's 9/11. At the same time, the European Union has found it appropriate to require the labeling of products made on the West Bank, an obvious attempt to implement an informal level of boycott against Israel. And the entire BDS movement, the effort to use boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, continues to be an ongoing concern in the Jewish world and raises questions about how Jewish organizations that either directly or indirectly support the BDS movement should be treated by the Jewish community at large. And what is the tone of discourse, debate, and disagreement within the Jewish community? Has the general American devolvement into vitriolic ad hominem polarization become a staple of Jewish life as well, where both right and left have lost the ability to listen to each other, listen to reasoned arguments on either side, and to respond to them without vilifying those with whom they disagree? Which included the way American Jews, Republican and Democrat, expressed their opinions on President Obama and the candidates now running in primary elections, hoping to become the presidential nominee of their respective parties. These are just some of the issues which are front and center in the Jewish world today, and we'll have the chance to hear opinion and perspective, again, from a most thoughtful panel who joined me on this roundtable edition of L'Chaim. Dr. Stephen Bayme is the director of the Contemporary Jewish Life Department of the American Jewish Committee and heads the AJC's Kupperman Institute on American Jewish-Israeli Relations. Rabbi Eric Yoffie is the president emeritus of the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, and he's currently a most incisive analyst and commentators whose columns appear regularly in Haaretz. Eric is also a frequent guest speaker and scholar in residence in communities across America. Helen Freedman is the executive director of the activist organizations Americans for a Safe Israel. And Steve Rothman is a former 8-term Democratic congressman from the state of New Jersey, who has the distinction of being the only Jew to ever serve on the House Appropriations Committee on Defense, which is the congressional body that recommends all military spending for the United States government. And it is such a joy to be sitting with all 4 of you. You've been here before, and I always look forward to the thoughts and comments you have. So thank you very much for making the effort to join us. Steve, I want to begin with you. people have said that what happened in Paris and what we're seeing happening even as we're meeting today on the streets of Jerusalem, on the streets of Tel Aviv, in the West Bank, where Palestinians are murdering Jews, that the ideological motivations of both come from the same well. To what extent do you see an analogy between what's happening in Israel and what happened in Paris?
I think the term probably is best used as kissing cousins. In other words, there clearly is a relationship. First of all, there's a relationship simply in terms of terrorism is terrorism. In other words, the moral issue is still the same, namely you're attacking innocent civilians. I think secondly, though, there's a larger ideological issue, which is that of a rejection of Western democracy, a rejection of Western values, a rejection of our way of life. So while there may be all sorts of political nuances and differences running between those groups, I think the term kissing cousins is quite appropriate.
Very interesting. Eric, what do you think?
I agree with Steve.
Nothing else.
The groups perpetuating these acts of terror are in fact very different. They have different goals. They have different intentions. We shouldn't think that they are all acting out of precisely the same motives. That obviously is not the case. But Steve was suggesting in very broad terms that there are similarities that we need to keep in mind, and foremost among them, as he mentioned, is this is profoundly evil. This is profoundly evil. No excuses.
Okay, but I asked you about the motivation, and I'm asking you whether you think what motivates ISIS, and ISIS, you can't turn on American television or pick up an American newspaper. There's ISIS right in your face. To what extent do you feel whatever is motivating the ISIS phenomenon is the same motivation that causes Palestinians to pick up knives and guns and drive cars into Jews?
There is an overlap. They're both Muslims, and an extremist version of Muslim that distorts fundamental Muslim teachings is present in both cases. But ISIS is a different organization with different goals. I mean, ISIS is focused on establishing a caliphate in a particular part of the world, building a quasi-state, creating the functions that are associated with such a state, and pursuing that agenda is what they are about at this moment. That's different from what Al-Qaeda is doing. And it's also different from what the Palestinian Authority is doing, which is different from what Hamas is doing. In each case there, we have agendas that are somewhat different and motivations that are somewhat different.
What do you think the agenda?
Despite the overlap.
Okay, what's the agenda of Palestinians who are murdering Jews now in Israel? What's their agenda?
First of all, there's a fundamental hatred there. I mean, I think we need to acknowledge that. And we need to say again, this is evil. No excuses. You're asking me to explain, and you have to be very careful in explaining. You don't justify. There is no justification. It's wrong. And among the Palestinians, you have those whose primary motivation is religious and whose primary goal is to replace the state of Israel with an extremist Muslim state. And Muslim Brotherhood, particularly Hamas, I think has those kinds of motivations. Among the Palestinian Authority, it's more complicated. There are secular elements. There are nationalist elements. Some are committed to the notion of developing a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Many others are not. But it isn't an extremist religious organization in the same way that Hamas is, for example. So we have to struggle with those distinctions in determining how we respond to them. You have to understand them in order to respond. So an overlap, similar dangers, engagement in evil, absolutely unacceptable, but different organizational motivations and in some cases different individual motivations.
Okay. So Helen, first of all, you recently came back from Israel.
Absolutely.
Both you, Helen, and you, Steve.
Right.
Recently, I mean, it's terrific. We're sitting with two people who in a moment, I also want you to each give us what you think the feel is of the state of Israel. But Helen, I asked you the same question. To what extent do you feel there is a similarity? You've heard Steve and Eric. What's your answer To what extent, when people see reports about ISIS, and then they see what's going on in Israel, to what extent is it the same phenomenon being acted out in different locations?
I think it's just that, Mark. I really do. As far as I'm concerned, first of all, just for the record, I want to just say we don't call them Palestinians because there is no Palestinian state. I don't talk about the West Bank because it's Judea and Samaria. Okay, so
there's a lot of disagreement about those terms.
Okay, but for myself, I just want that established for your audience. As far as the terrorism that's going on in Israel and the horrible terrorism that we've seen just last Friday in Paris, it seems to me that arose by any other name, it smells the same, whether it's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, whatever name you want to give these people, they are all aiming towards the same thing, and that is the caliphate. It is the Islamic Caliphate. It's the restoration of what the Muslims perceive as the lands that were theirs at one time and which were lost and have to be regained. We have always determined that Israel is the canary in the coal mine. I think you know that metaphor, the idea that the miner goes down into the mine, carries the canary with him, the air turns foul, the canary starts singing, and that's an alert so that he, then ascends into fresh air. The terrorism that's been going on in Israel, I was just reading Naftali Bennett's article in today's Wall Street Journal. And he went back to March 27th, 2002, when the Park Hotel in Netanya was attacked, and the people were there gathered for a Seder, a beautiful Seder, and blown up, and countless deaths and injuries and so on. My group actually visited the Park Hotel shortly after that, and we saw the devastation. The murders, the killings, the discos, the pizza parlors, all these places in Israel that have been under constant attack have been a warning to the Western world, a warning that this is coming. And today, according to Steve Emerson and the Investigative Project for Terrorism, an organization that has been working on this issue for so long, it was 1994, I think, that he first put out a film called Jihad in America. Jihad in America. He walked into a mosque and he heard all the hatred being promoted. Now we have 176 terrorist cells inside America, and we know where they are. Why aren't they being eliminated? Where is this?
Why aren't they, Helen?
Well, I blame it all on Obama. I know, and this is probably not a popular thing to say, but I know that this president is not taking care of the security of our country.
That's how you feel.
It's how I feel,
Yeah.
and the evidence is there to support that feeling. It's not just, like something I'm taking out of the blue. The evidence is there. The fact that he called the Paris attack a setback when all these people are killed and so many targets. It's not just the concert hall, which had some connection with Israel. Apparently, I think it's the Bataclan Hall, was owned by Jews at one time, just up until recently, and hosted many Israeli events.
But it's not owned now by a Jew.
And the band that was playing there had just recently played in Tel Aviv.
Okay. All right. Anyway, you also see a very direct connection.
Direct,
Okay.
absolutely, one and the same.
Okay, so Steve, here you are, a former Democratic congressman. You can say anything you want if you want to respond to Helen in terms of Obama. It's not like I wasn't going to get to the president, but it's not what my focus is at the moment. My focus is, to what extent do you also see an equivalency between what's happening in Paris, what and what happens in Israel. And I want to make sure everybody understands why this question is important. Most people, Eric, are very critical of ISIS, and they see ISIS as the enemy, and they want ISIS destroyed. To one degree or another, the people disagree on what the strategy should be. Should there be boots on the ground? Should there not be boots on the ground? People don't have the same feeling right now about the Palestinians. And in the United States, there's a large swath that is very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and sees the Palestinian as, you know, the oppressed people who are suffering with a brutal occupation imposed by a colonial state of Israel, and that when Palestinians kill Jews, it's not experienced the way people experience the horror of ISIS killing Parisians.
Well,
So when I ask the question, I'm asking because I want to hear what the four of you say, and the follow-up question is going to be, I've heard three of you say you see an equivalency, then I want you to talk about why there isn't an equivalency of sentiment. But first, you have the right now to comment on anything you've heard Helen or anybody else say.
Well, firstly, when you talk about equivalency, that raises lots of tangential issues.
Of motivation.
Let me talk about what I believe they have in common
Okay.
at the basest level. These are individuals who are disaffected, lonely, disappointed, suicidal, homicidal, who have been reached by people who they admire or who fund them with messages of incitement to murder. So that's the common element between the Hamas murderers and the Palestinian murderers.
Okay,
in my view,
I'll let you go on. I just
Sure.
want to know if everybody agrees. Do you agree it's all about loneliness?
Absolutely not.
Not?
Absolutely not, no.
No.
Three people here, four, feel
that's
that the
absurd.
argument that these people are lost people who have found now some reason to live, and as you point out, they're suicidal die. You're the only one of the five of us who see it that way. I just want you to know that doesn't mean you're wrong.
All right, then let me respond.
Okay.
Okay. You tell me why someone becomes suicidal or homicidal. What would motivate a person to do that? Let me finish.
Okay, but
if I may.
Yes, you asked me a
Everybody's
question.
got, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here in such august company. But I don't agree with everything everybody said. I'm sure they're not going to agree with everything I say.
That's what
we all have.
You're here for a reason.
We all have different life
Yes.
experiences and accumulated
And I
knowledge.
want people to hear your position.
So, if you'll allow me, I will give it. Why these people become suicidal and homicidal, you psychological experts can all figure that out. Why they are susceptible to messages to go kill people and die in the process with the certainty that they're going to die themselves certainly is a subject for intelligent people to figure out. The goal of the West is to prevent them from killing us, and two, to try to understand the mentality of those who are being led to do this, and in order to stop this from happening, of course, stop the inciters from inciting, and if they won't do so with rational argument, then we must kill them and remove them. So that's the commonality of arguments. The notion that President Obama has put America at danger after the George Tenet book just came out, was about to come out, saying that President Bush was aware, as was Condi Rice, of the lead up by the folks about to fly planes into buildings, has just come out. Many of us knew about this a long time, have known about it for a long time. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying if you go back to decades, well before Obama was in power, there have been jihadist murderers here in America. So it has nothing to do with Obama. And if you look at the number, as of this taping, and I don't want to give it a Kanena Hura, the number of those Americans who've lost their lives on American soil to jihad, President Obama so far is doing rather well compared to his predecessors. And in terms of supporting Israel militarily and intelligence, there's clearly been no president in American history better for Israel than Obama.
Okay. I want to hold Obama, but Steve has raised a fascinating issue. I want to hear any of you speak. Your initial answer was you don't agree with his analysis, the psychological analysis, and then he says, well, then explain to me why people are willing to engage in this kind of behavior, especially when it means almost certain death.
You know, way back in high school, we were studying Samuel 2, I'm sorry, the rebellion of Absalom against David.
From the Bible.
Right.
Okay.
Absalom's advisor, a man named Achitophel, I'm sorry, David's advisor.
Yes,
David's advisor, a man named Achitophel. No, I'm sorry, he was Absalom's advisor. He shifted,
sure?
yeah, he shifted gears. He was David's advisor.
Okay.
He moved over to Absalom's camp. He commits suicide because his advice is rejected. I raised my hand at that point. I said, of all the reasons to commit suicide, I think that was about the most stupid one. So his advice was rejected. The instructor answered me quite astutely. He said, his ideology was far more compelling to him than the value placed upon his personal life. In other words, he was strongly committed to a particular ideology. That ideology was rejected, therefore he committed suicide. Come back to it now 50 years later, a new biography of Henry Kissinger by Niall Ferguson makes a very profound point about Kissinger's ideology. That Kissinger felt very strongly that people do things because of strong convictions, religion being primary among them. Extremism, if you will, is the breeding grounds for terrorism. That obviously different people have different psychological drives running through them. That applies to all of us. The question is, why would an extremist ideology triumph? The answer is because they believe in it very strongly, whereas most of us who work in what might be called the liberal, rational Western world, we say, well, you've got an opinion, I've got one, we'll meet somewhere along the lines.
But I would ask you this, as Eric said, ISIS wants to create a caliphate and an Islamic State in its region and then expand it. I don't think we yet know what was motivating these individual Palestinian murderers, whether it in fact was religion, and
Look,
as opposed to a desire to have their own state, an immature or a crazy notion that they were doing something productive or heroic, when in fact it was not productive, not heroic, unless, of course, to them heroism was giving up their life for an abstract cause. But I don't think we yet know that religion yet played a part in each of the Palestinian murders.
Okay, look, first of all, the ideology of Hamas is fundamentally religion. Now, it rejects the notion of a Jewish state on religious grounds. Israel is an illegitimate entity in Hamas's theology. And that's certainly one of the major drives here. Secondly, let's not forget the Temple Mount.
Are all of the Palestinian murderers members of Hamas?
Well, first of all, Hamas is the breeding grounds for a good deal of terrorism.
But Steve, they're not all Hamas members.
They're not the exclusive ones.
Right.
But clearly the Temple Mount was one major discussion point.
It was a trigger.
A trigger, and it's a point of incitement.
Right.
Temple Mount is fundamentally a religious issue. As far as the Palestinian state is concerned, again, there is a liberal, rational way of securing a Palestinian state. Namely, come to the peace table and let's talk about it. I think most Israelis, about 2/3 of Israelis, still favor a Palestinian state, a two-state solution. If their goal was to create a Palestinian state, there are better ways of creating it.
That's not true. In their minds, in their twisted thinking, they believe that if they continue to reject a two-state solution, they will have a one-state solution. And by their birth rates, although now things have changed in Israel and the Jews are procreating more, thank God, in their twisted thinking, if they continue to reject a two-state solution, they'll have a one-state solution which will destroy the democratic and Jewish nature of the state of Israel.
Absolutely. But again, that's a religious conviction.
That is clearly a strategy of theirs, of some of them, to create a state on the entirety of what
Absolutely,
is
that's based on conviction.
Okay, I
from the
promised
Mediterranean
Helen.
to the
Okay,
Jordan.
I have to jump in here. First of all, you ask what motivates these people to perpetrate these horrible acts. It's very, very clear. You watch PMW, Palestinian Media Watch, run by Itamar Marcus. He shows you snaps that are taken directly from PATV. And what do you see? Little 2-year-old and 3-year-old children being indoctrinated with hatred for Israel. They are learning songs, poems, and so on to teach them to hate Israel. As an educator, I know, and as a mother, that you educate little children with certain ideas. You cannot erase those ideas. There's no way of erasing them in the future. This hatred stays with them. And the Arab mothers, in some cases, inculcate this into their children and encourage it. And we've heard interviews with Arab mothers whose child has just performed a suicidal act, a homicidal act, and she says, I wish all my sons will do the same thing. So this is what is going on.
Helen,
There's a hatred that is being perpetuated
Helen,
there.
I agree with that point of yours,
Yes.
and I mentioned it, which is that these individuals are being incited to commit acts of murder.
it's an educational process.
I said they're being incited to commit acts of murder and suicide. And I offered some notions as to what might be going on, for example, in the mind of a mother who would say to her child, I want you to kill yourself after you kill a Jew. What goes on in that mother's mind? But I know Eric had a point to make as well.
I want to make sure we don't lose the train. My question, my surprise was, surprise not fair to you. Your point was, when I said, well, how do you see the relationship between ISIS and the Palestinians, is you mentioned that you feel that what drives, I thought you meant ISIS, maybe you meant the Palestinians, what drives ISIS and the fact that they're able to recruit, and they've recruited in large numbers, they've used social media, is something I have heard, namely, the people whom they're attracting are the misfits, the lonely, the disenfranchised. I thought that's what you were, and my only question to you was whether people here at this table agreed that that was motivating them. Well, you've heard.
I don't think it's only that,
Okay,
Mark. I don't think it's only that, because there is a religious component.
Yes.
And there is a commitment beyond that, so someone can feel great about themselves, but be brainwashed with a religious or other teaching to commit murder.
So, Steve,
but
what I
think
wanted to
it's-
give them a chance to say
think
was
it's not
why
fair
they disagreed with you.
But not everyone, I don't think all folks do, but I'll let everybody speak. There are clearly, unless my colleagues disagree, that there is an element in the population that is incited to commit murder and suicide who are not purely religious, but there is to some degree other elements going on in their individual lives that cause them to commit such horrendous acts of violence.
I understand. And all I was trying to say to you was that the four of us see that as a minor theme, and that the larger theme, the much larger theme, is a religious ideology where they believe that in some way they are doing what they believe is God's work, Allah's work, and that many of them are well educated, have money, come from very good homes, and they're still attracted. And therefore, when you hear, well, the problem is that ISIS and Palestinians also, there are many Palestinians who are not doing badly at all. I believe you're making a mistake.
No, I'm not saying that. You're mischaracterizing what I'm saying. I'm not saying these poor, innocent folks who are suffering in poverty, this is their response to being impoverished.
Lonely,
I'm not saying...
Your
first word
was
I
lonely.
didn't
said lonely.
But then Mark also said as well. I said despondent, homicidal, suicidal, incited by others on religious grounds and on other grounds to become heroes. Okay? So it's a bigger picture than just religion. At the end of the day, and you asked a question about why don't the folks in America see Palestinian murderers in the same dangerous light as ISIS murderers.
Unsympathetic. Why aren't we unsympathetic?
I'll give you the answer is, in my view, because Palestinian murderers are not yet a threat directly to the people of the United States of America on our homeland, not yet. They threaten our most important strategic and friend and moral ally in the region, the Jewish state of Israel, and threaten the safety and security of the West, because that's such a critical part of the world and the West's interest at the state of Israel. But the people of America are not directly as affected by, unfortunately, the death of an Israeli as they are at the thought that they or their children will die in a shopping mall, God forbid, when they go out to shop on Thanksgiving.
Very fair.
Steve, just one quick addendum, though. I think the reason some of us perhaps react strongly to your comments about loneliness and despondency, it's oftentimes Western liberal voices that will not articulate Islamism, jihad. They will gloss over this religious dimension that in turn makes it much more pernicious.
Then let me do this. Let me make sure that I say it as clearly as possible.
You said it several times.
Radical,
Yes.
This is radical Islamic
Yes,
jihad,
that was missing from
terrorism, and murder.
Yes, that was missing from your opening comment.
Inexcusable on any and every level.
Well done. Okay, Eric.
The other side to that, Steve. Let's begin with the premise that we condemn Palestinian terrorism unequivocally. Unequivocally. Yet it is often conservative voices who are unable to recognize that having done that, that there are some legitimate issues having to do with justice for the Palestinians and political arrangements and the need to take action that will resolve the political situation there, potentially involving a two-state solution. They're unable to suggest that that's even a legitimate topic of discussion now. And the truth of the matter is that that needs to be on the table as well. It is possible to be unequivocal in your rejection and condemnation of Palestinian terrorism and still say we need to talk about a Palestinian state and the issues of justice for the Palestinian people. And that's a legitimate and, in fact, an important discussion that contributes to the overall...
Two footnotes to Eric's comments. Number one is that were there a Palestinian state today on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which are the terms that I use, you would still have Palestinian extremism, Palestinian terrorism calling for dismantling of the state of Israel. So therefore, while obviously I agree with you fully, it needs to be put on the table, but were there a two-state solution, which again, chances right now are remote in any case, but were there such, we would still be having these problems of Palestinian terrorism. Secondly, as far as Al-Qaeda and ISIS are concerned, and again, I agree fully there are nuances between them, but their basic problem is the issue of Islamism, namely that they want to impose an Islamic society, an Islamic state, upon area. They want to use the Sharia, they want to use the Islamic legal code. So that even if Israel didn't exist entirely, even if Hamas did get its full agenda, we would still have those problems in terms of ISIS. And
Helen.
Yes, I just want to say that you're talking about the conservative view that doesn't allow for the two-state solution. Just a week ago, I came back from Israel. I take groups twice a year. We go to places that many tourists, that most tourists do not go to.
For example?
We go to Temple Mount. We go on Har HaBayit. The situation there is disgraceful in terms of the discrimination against Jews. Jews have to stand on the side, have to submit passports, have to get special permission to go up.
Israel agreed to that.
15 people.
Israel agreed to that.
I understand that, but this is, you see, these agreements.
So you're criticizing the government of Israel.
I'm criticizing such agreements, yes, Eric.
Going back to Moshe
Yes.
Dayan.
I do criticize
She has
those
a right.
agreements.
By the way, I want to hear
the
all.
status
I
quo.
just want to make
the
it clear. Just make it clear. That's
Supreme
all.
Court, the Supreme Court of Israel just ruled that Jews do have the right to pray on the Mount, and the security forces supersede that judgment, and they say it's not allowed. So there we were, 15 people, innocent walking
Prime
like
Minister
this.
of Israel has been very explicit about that. I mean, to say it's just the security forces, I mean, that's simply
No,
untrue. The
absolutely.
political leadership
Of
has
course.
been emphatic.
No, 100%.
That-
Both parties.
100% correct.
That
Has been emphatic
Yes,
that there's not going to be any change
Exactly
in the
right.
status quo on
Exactly
the
right.
Temple
No,
Mount.
you're-
Not just the security.
And this has
No,
been the
I-
case
it's
since
coming-
'67,
I-
regardless of the government.
Absolutely.
Of course, it all comes from Bibi Netanyahu, from Prime Minister Netanyahu. These are his orders. But the security forces make sure that those are
As they should.
enforced.
It's their
as they
job.
should.
So 15 of us, innocent Jews, can't wear our kippahs, can't have any identification. This medallion that I'm wearing, the Gush Katif medallion, that cannot be worn. You are surrounded by 15 guards as you are
What's
pushed
your point, though?
through the Temple
What
Mount.
is your point?
The point is that what we're experiencing in Israel today is so much appeasement of the Arabs, so much conciliation with them, that Israel is doing itself an injustice. And it would be impossible to have what you call the two-state solution because there's no one to solve
What if
anything
Muslims
with.
wanted to come to the Western Wall and pray there? What would your response be?
Well, I don't see anybody stopping them.
Yeah, first
I
of all,
don't
there is
see-
someone
I
stopping
don't-
them.
who-
Mixed groups can't pray there of Jews. But if Muslims went to the Western Wall, they would not be permitted to pray there. And in fact, there would be an uproar among the Israelis that you suggest are unhappy with the situation on the Temple Mount.
Why?
Because it's a sacred place for Jews, and therefore certain respect is expected of the non-Jewish population. So applying that in the same way on the Temple Mount to a place that is sacred to Muslims, why shouldn't that be appropriate?
And it's not sacred to the Jews?
Well, first of all, normative Judaism, mainstream Judaism over the course of the last 2,000 years
Yes.
has been very explicit that Jews are not supposed to be on the Temple Mount because you might step on the Holy of Holies.
Oh.
That is mainstream
that is rabbinic opinion.
Judaism.
Oh,
Mainstream
No
well,
one
Judaism.
I-
disputes
And
rabbinic
if you
opinion.
put that together,
There's a
if you
Temple
took that-
Mount Institute, and there's a wonderful
That's
rabbi
a
there.
I
marginal-
feel this is we're going a little
it's a
astray here.
marginal
We're
We're
fringe
going a
group.
little astray. I want to
Okay.
come back to the main issue here. And the main issue that I've been asking is, first, are the two expressions that we have now been experiencing in Paris and on the streets of Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv and on the West Bank, do they arise out of the same thing? And the next question I wanted to ask, and you, Steve, have touched on it already, I thought it was an interesting answer. I'd like to hear what the other three say. Why is it that the American reaction, the Jewish American reaction also, is horrified by ISIS, and yet there is within the American Jewish community, Eric, there is a swath that is very sympathetic to Palestinians and just has a hard time
That's
seeing
sympathetic to Palestinian
Yes.
terrorism?
No, not the terrorism. But don't condemn it in the same way that there's unequivocal condemnation.
I believe Palestinian terrorism
the way
is
you say this,
overwhelmingly
the way
condemned.
you say it is so clear and explicit. Not everybody says it the way you say
But
it.
other than the Jewish Voices of Peace, and I'm trying to think who else might be in that camp. There are certain fringe groups who are not appropriately emphatic in condemning the extremism and terrorism that we have been discussing. That
You feel it's
appalls
across the
me.
board, generally.
But I think that's a marginal group. I
Okay,
mean,
you watch all the time. Is he right?
Look, mainstream American opinion is overwhelmingly pro-Israel, and I think it's important, certainly in terms of your viewers. Let's not get
I'm sorry. Would you say that again?
Ever since 1948 down to 2015, every poll indicates that Americans favor Israel over the Palestinians.
Americans.
So in that respect, I don't think the pro-Israel opinion here is in danger of collapsing. That continues.
I didn't ask that.
Okay, but to put it in context, there's a reservoir of support for Israel that is very broad and very deep in American public culture. As far as the cause of the Palestinians is concerned, Eric is correct. There's unequivocal rejection of terrorism per se. What the qualification is that without question, Israel, especially on the college campus, in what might be called elite intellectual circles, which are very important in terms of opinion formation, Israel increasingly has been portrayed as the aggressor state, colonial, post-colonial, settler state. In that respect, the image of Israel has taken a beating in recent years. Does that get translated into support for the Palestinian cause? Yes. Support for Palestinian terrorism? Absolutely not.
I say this gently, and I may not be right because I'm only one guy, but I'm talking to people all the time. I don't agree with you here. I think there is, well, while I understand the way Eric says it, that there should be unequivocal, across-the-board condemnation of terrorism. I am constantly coming across Jews who are critical of the Palestinian strategy, and but there's a sense of, but you have to understand what's driving them. And that if Israel didn't, it wouldn't be happening. Nobody says that about ISIS. And I feel that it's not, it's within the, quote, strong pro-Israel camp, you don't hear it. But when you talk about American Jewry as a whole, I'm not talking about synagogue-affiliated AJC people, URJ people, Americans for Save Israel. There's a vast, vast American Jewish population here that's not involved right now. And what they see is an Israel who is the evil, and it has, in their mind, it's Israel's evil that has provoked this despicable but understandable violence on the part of Palestinians, and that if Israel changed its policies, then there wouldn't be knife-wielding, gun-toting, car-driving Palestinians killing Israelis.
Well,
and I don't hear that
the Swedish
similarly
diplomat
expressed when we talk about ISIS. That's what I'm getting at.
I want to, first of all, agree with Steve. I'm spending more time on campus now. I make Israel's case. I make Zionism's case. I do it with delight, and I find it's not hard to make.
Good
this
for you.
notion that it's terribly difficult somehow to explain what Israel is about and what it's doing and the history of Zionism and so on. Not my experience. Not that there isn't resistance and so on.
Has any group protested you?
Well,
You're being free
let's
of that.
put it this way. Have I been formal protests? No, but have I been confronted by Muslims? Yes, absolutely. The one thing that you cannot explain is the settlement policy of the government of Israel. So, I mean, you just have to put that on the table. And the truth of the matter is, Jewish groups on campus don't defend it, including establishment, mainstream Jewish groups don't defend it. Because they don't agree with it either.
Just make sure our audience understands. When you're talking about settlement policy, what settlements are you talking about?
I'm talking about settlement building outside of the major blocks that are going to remain part of Israel.
Okay, you're not talking about the ring around Jerusalem.
Well,
you're not talking about
I am not talking about that. Part of the problem is all of those issues get confused in public discussion.
That's right.
And because the state of Israel hasn't articulated a clear, sensible, logical, and compelling policy, that
would distinguish between the two.
That would distinguish, and that easily could be done. It could be done. Go look at 2004 and what Sharon did with Bush. Let's take a conservative prime minister and a conservative president. They came up with a resolution in 2004. If the president of the United States and the prime minister of Israel today were to articulate precisely that agreement,
and for our audience, articulate it. What was it?
Define the settlement blocks. Settlement within those blocks was to continue. Outside of the blocks, it was not to continue, and illegal settlements were to be dismantled. That was the heart of it.
Is that not the policy now of the State of Israel?
Essentially, it's the practice of the State of Israel. In other words,
it's not the policy now.
It's not the policy per se, but it is the practice.
Well,
look, the government is a broad-ranging coalition, and there are people with it. It's not a broad-ranging. It's a coalition that is center-right. People on the right want the right to settle everywhere, and again, one can argue in practice the government limits construction to areas that are within the settlement blocks. But in principle, the right to settle is asserted.
When you're on campus, people are smart. In other words, the enemies of Israel are smart. It's not as if they don't read the newspaper. It's not as if they don't read books. And so people get up and say, the prime minister of Israel has said X, Y, and Z about settlements. Or the minister in the government has said X, Y, and Z. Or they've just announced settlement construction here or settlement construction there. It's exceedingly difficult to deal with that, which isn't to say that I don't deal with it in making my case for Israel. What I am simply saying is it would not be difficult to arrive at a resolution that would be enormously helpful in making Israel's case. And this is a problem on the Israeli side, even as we condemn terrorism, with all the...
So you're being watched, and I want to make sure people understand what you're saying, and there's no confusion here. Are you suggesting that the Prime Minister of Israel, or that the Israeli government, has announced construction of settlements outside the existing settlement blocks? Because every time I understand that they have done so, it's within Jerusalem, which they consider to be at the moment an existing settlement block. They don't consider, the state of Israel doesn't even think of Jerusalem, anywhere in Jerusalem.
I'm suggesting that about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, there were reports from within Likud that were not denied of Netanyahu arguing that he had done more settlement building than any of his predecessors. If you look at the numbers, you look at the numbers from Elliot Abrams. Let's take a conservative. Let's take a conservative, not a liberal. He wrote an article in Foreign Affairs this year in which he looked at the settler population outside of the blocks. His numbers were, they went from 70,000 in 2009 to about 92 or 93,000 today. Those are
I've heard 120,000.
Right. Those are very conservative numbers. In other words, there are many people who would suggest the numbers are much higher. But Elliot Abrams, an impeccable conservative source, has acknowledged a 30% increase during Netanyahu's term in the settlement population outside of the blocks. Now, how does he get around that? He talks about the fact we haven't built new settlements. But if you're adding people, it's not the territory that's key, it's people, because ultimately people will have to be removed from those blocks. If you're adding people to the area outside of the major settlement blocks, you're causing a problem. I'm simply saying that if we're dealing with this on campus, and it will be much, much easier if this issue were to be resolved and that Israel could do it.
Yes, actually the statement that Netanyahu made was, and he said it very proudly, that there's been less settlement building, and he's imposed a freeze on most of the buildings.
You said the opposite. Look it up.
No, I was just discussing this the other day, so I know that he's put the freeze on. And you speak to Israelis, everything's been frozen. And the only building that goes on in Israel today is illegal Arab building throughout the country. Throughout the Negev, all you see is illegal Bedouin homes. You go through the Galilee, illegal Arab homes. You go through Yerushalayim, illegal Arab homes.
Have you seen the Elliot Abrams study that I mentioned?
I have not seen his study,
look at it.
but I
Foreign
have
Affairs,
been
readily
in
available.
Israel and traveled around, and I've seen it for myself. I don't have to read it in these papers.
He did an analysis of the demographic data of the Israeli government.
And I think
That's
it's
where his numbers came
disgraceful.
from.
I want to go on record. I think it's disgraceful that we have Jews sitting around here who are talking disparagingly about settlements. The settlements are the biblical promise. And the person who doesn't believe in the biblical promise does not believe in Israel. You will have a patchwork quilt kind of place. And what Steve said just before about the fact that it wouldn't put an end to Arab terrorism is absolutely right. They will kill and kill and kill and bomb and attack until they are one with ISIS, ISIS, and the whole thing becomes.
One sentence.
And the reason, to get to Mark's question, the reason that people don't seem to equate the terrorism going on in Israel with what's going on throughout Europe and everywhere else is the fact that the media doesn't report it. JBS is unique in the fact that it is covering Jewish issues, Israeli issues. You think you're going to find the report about the Jews stabbed in Gush Etzion and in Tel Aviv in tomorrow's New York Times? You think you're going to find it? If it's there, it's buried in the back page.
I think I will find it.
You think you're going to find it in the Wall Street Journal or in the New York Post? In the meantime, pages and pages go to Paris.
Okay, I know you're, hold on.
Okay.
Go ahead. But Steve's been patient.
Yes.
First of all, I think it's without dispute that Israel has received great and good and appropriate treatment from the United States of America it needs to continue, it needs to be amped up, given Israel's increasing burden.
I will tell you what bothers
on military.
me.
Let me just finish, because I want to ask
I want
you.
to be sure. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Then I want a chance at some point.
Yeah.
I go on television all the time.
Yeah.
And I talk about the military, the intelligence, the economic support that's come from the Obama administration to Israel, which has been fabulous. There is a dimension of the U.S.-Israeli relationship which bothers me enormously, and I do want you to address it. But so I don't want it just to be, oh, everything's hunky-dory.
Okay.
It's not all hunky-dory.
If we
But
can
go
get-
ahead. Go ahead.
All right, I'll be happy to get
Yeah.
to that question. On the question of settlements, you know, certainly Helen is right to her opinion that Greater Israel, it's either that or it's not Israel. I would suggest that the founders of Israel consistently made the decision that they were willing to give up on the notion of Greater Israel from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River, consistently since the founding of the Jewish state, and even before the Balfour Declaration and the 47 partition plan. So you should take that up with the founders in whatever way you can. And excuse me,
Oh,
let me finish.
Let him finish. Let him finish.
And all the rest.
Let
And all
him
the rest.
finish.
But you're certainly entitled to your view. And by the way, if it could be achieved, and Israel could remain a secure and stable and a democracy, I would be for it. If it can't, I'm for a secure and stable Israel within the largest borders that it can achieve. I do believe that Israel is biblically and otherwise historically entitled to it. But compromises have been made territorially by nations all over the world in order to get 3/4 of a loaf rather than nothing. But I wanted to ask Mark, why do you think, since the Vietnam War, when Americans, particularly young folks on campuses, were so agitated and upset with American militarism and with the notion of the David versus the Goliath versus the Davids of North Vietnam, which was a mischaracterization and unfair to America and our troops and our goals there, why do you think that after that generation was educated in these liberal institutions for the last 40 years, their representatives in the Congress from both parties continue to support the Jewish state of Israel in overwhelming numbers in an overwhelming way? I will offer an answer. One is to thank you, and it's by way of a thank you to you for what you're doing. We've educated the pro-Israel community, has educated our elected officials from the municipal, county, state, and federal levels as to why support for the Jewish state of Israel is so vitally important to America's national security.
That's true.
It's good for us. And whatever we give in terms of military aid, economic aid, et cetera, intelligence sharing, we get back 100 times here in America. 100 times. Israel is indispensable to America's national security. And yet there are those who still feel that we're on the precipice of something terrible. It may be because we're Jewish and we have a history of these terrible things happening to us, so we need to be eternally vigilant, and I salute you for that. And in my own way, and each of us in our own way, continue to be vigilant and to take action in that regard. But why do you think, notwithstanding the last 40 years of this anti-Zionist view on campus from a lot of the professors, why that hasn't succeeded? Do you think that 9/11? Do you think that 9/11 has affected us? And don't you think that ISIS will increase Americans' chance of being sympathetic
when you say,
to
why
Israel?
has that not succeeded? What's the that?
Eroding
Why
the US-Israel
hasn't
relationship.
your concern, and I share your concern always, that we make sure that young people are not persuaded for the rest of their lives to believe the lies and distorted perspective about Israel that they're being taught, a lot of them on university campuses in America. Okay. Why do you think that hasn't held? And don't you believe there are other forces at play, including the Christian notion of Israel's importance to Christianity, Jews' importance to Christianity, Israel's importance to America's national security, and Americans noticed who committed 9/11 and who committed these ISIS attacks. They were coming from radical Islamic terrorists, not from Jews and not from other Christians, mostly. The Oklahoma City bomber, the Unabomber, the Olympic Park bomber, of course, are exceptions.
Are you saying, is your comment here a response to my saying that I believe that there are many American Jews who, for a host of reasons, having much to do with their self-perception as Jews, when I say to you, I respectfully disagree with the way in which Steve puts it, and that I feel that there is a vast swath of American Jewry which does not view the Palestinian in the same way they view the ISIS terrorist, and that the argument is over and over again, yes, what they do is terrible, but there's no but when it comes to ISIS. The but that you hear from American Jews is, but Israel's making this problem. If Israel would change its policies, whether it's settlement policies, or whether it would two-state, whether it would withdraw, if Israel would stop bulldozing Palestinian houses, whatever it is, there's always a but. That is real.
I think you use the phrase "vast swath of American Jewry," and I want to challenge that. I want
numbers.
Mark, I want to challenge that. I want to challenge that.
No, it does. No, it does not.
I want to challenge that when you say there's a vast swath of American Jewry who feel that way.
Pew said that if Israel were to go out of existence, wouldn't affect them at all.
The number of Jews who said that Israel was either very important or essential to their...
I want to answer my question.
I don't know that number. I'm giving you other numbers that I think make the opposite point.
Your question wasn't asked in Pew, by the way.
Yes, it was.
If Israel would go out of existence?
Yes. Yes.
That was a question put by Steve Cohen and Ari Kelman.
It's in Pew as well.
Okay.
What I'm suggesting is that, what's the thrust of Pew? They asked the number of Jews, in terms of their Jewish identity, is Israel very important or essential to their Jewish identity? The number was, I think, 87%.
No, it was much lower, Eric.
Yeah, I don't know.
The problem was basically, it depends which Jews you're talking about. If you're talking about what is admittedly a very large issue of assimilation, which is close to 50%.
Yes.
If you're talking about that sector of the population, Israel scores incredibly low. Among millennials, only 22% of those who regard themselves as, for lack of a better term, secular Jews, meaning not affiliated with any of the religious movements at all, only 22% of millennials regard Israel as central to their identity. In turn, because that group is so large, it was representing about 50% of the overall population, the actual percentage of those who say Israel is central to their identity, I believe, is 43%.
But wait a minute, that's not what Mark asked.
But
Mark, you took a different position. Mark, you took a different position.
43 is not even a majority.
That's right. I'm not questioning this issue of, is there declining American Jewish support for Israel? That's something we need to worry about for the future in terms of, I wouldn't cry wolf today.
Right.
But the U.S.-Israel relationship has depended upon a strong, vibrant American Jewish community that says we care deeply about the state of Israel and we want the United States to be supportive of Israel.
Yes, but I've got to tell you, Steve, the Jews represent 2% of the population in America.
I know.
Mark's
question was about American Jewry.
No, it wasn't even that. It's 2% of the American population, which means to prevail in the houses of government, we need allies of all stripes and religious faiths in the 98% who are not Jewish. So we need to continue that educational effort. But when my question to Mark was not how many Jewish folks in America say that Israel is essential or seminal to their self-identification. That's not what you were concerned about. You said there was a vast swath of American Jewry, 100% of the Jews, saying they had some explanation or sympathy, God forbid, for Palestinian murderers. And that, I wonder where you get your numbers. And with respect, because you are a very smart guy, where you get that perception, because it's not so.
That's not what I said.
I think we're confusing between support for the Palestinian, sympathy for the Palestinian cause, and expressing understanding of Palestinian terrorism. Those are two very, very different things. Expressing sympathy for the Palestinian cause, yes, there is a large, not majority, a minority.
What were the Pew numbers? I mean, first of all, Steve, I'm going to look at the numbers that you mentioned. I remember them differently.
Sure.
I don't want to argue it here.
Sure.
They did ask a question, both of Jews, about, do you believe the current government of Israel, this was the previous Netanyahu government, is sincere in its efforts to secure peace?
Yeah.
There were about 38% said yes, about 45 to 48%
widespread
said
distrust.
no. So they did not
You're
believe.
right, I remember.
Then they asked, do you believe that the Palestinians are sincere in their efforts? The numbers were something like 12%. In other words, you had American Jews who were split, but more negative than positive about the actions of the government of Israel in terms of its efforts to negotiate peace. You had an overwhelming consensus that they don't trust the Palestinians at all. They have absolutely no faith in what the Palestinians are doing in terms of their supposed efforts to reach peace. I was very encouraged by that.
Okay. We read it slightly differently. I hope you're right, by the way. And I'll try one more time to articulate it. And you tell me whether this resonates with you at all or not. The people who are concerned with the Jewish support for BDS, and there is Jewish support for BDS. There is...
Limited.
Yes, limited, but there is support. There is, in the liberal Jewish community, and a tendency to say what I tried to express to Steve. While it is unacceptable, while the Palestinians are, while terrorism and murder is reprehensible, what we must do, and I'm saying this also as quietly, but I have to say it, it's also the way in which it sounds like the administration couches it. Let me finish. That the problem is there is a fundamental inequity in the Middle East where the Palestinian is basically the victim and Israel is the aggressor. And therefore, while it is unacceptable for anybody to take a knife and stab somebody going into a synagogue, or take an axe and go into a synagogue and hack away at rabbis, it's unacceptable. At the same time, what I hear, Steve, is but. I hear but all the time. And the but is, Israel could stop it. The Palestinian is wrong. But underneath what the Palestinian does is something that Israel is doing that is provoking it. And that therefore, the way in which it's framed places the onus on Israel. And what I keep saying is, in a way that I never hear anybody say about ISIS. And I wanted to know whether I'm the only one who thinks that's true, and if so, then I'm the only one who thinks it's true. But it's what I hear. It's what I hear. It's what I read, and it's what I experience personally.
Okay, one quick comment. I think my friend Steve Cohen is quite correct when he calls American Jewry a tale of two Jewries. In other words, those Jews who take an active interest in the Middle East in one form or another, either follow the news, visit Israel, engage in discussion about it around the dinner table, they tend not to say the yes but because they understand the context in which Israel is operating. It's also fair to say there's another Jewry out there that is largely indifferent to matters Jewish generally and indifferent to Israel as a result. Those people have basically, number one, have minimal knowledge of what's actually taking place. They don't know what a settlement is to begin with. And for those people, there is a sense, without question, that unlike ISIS, which is saying we're going to overthrow the Western democracies, they see Palestinians as saying we have legitimate grievances that Israel is not satisfying. And there Eric is adding something to it by saying that Israel's settlement policy, as articulated, gives fuel to the fire of those who say Israel is being an aggressor state here. So I think your comment has some value to it, in the sense of we have a tale of two Jewries. A real problem in terms of U.S.-Israel relations, long run, not tomorrow, Steve, but down the road, I think is twofold. Number one is that as American Jewry declines in its commitment to being Jewish, it will decline in its commitment to Israel, and that's a major pillar of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Second, and here I think you glossed over it, it's not that BDS is taking over the campus, but that if Israel's image on campus declines, especially on elite campuses, now it's only a handful of them, Harvard, Berkeley, Yale, and a few places in between. If Israel's image declines on those elite campuses, those are the people who are going to become very influential in American society, American public opinion, American government. Will they still favor a special relationship between the United States and Israel 10, 15 years down the road? I'd be quite concerned about that.
Yeah, let me just say this. If you've looked
Well,
at the
hold
membership
on.
of the United States Congress.
Helen has been patient. Helen's been very patient.
But I want to just
Thank you.
hold
promise-
this thought. Think in your mind about the numbers in the United States Congress who have attended Harvard, Yale, Stanford, or Berkeley. And it may give you some comfort. But Helen, go ahead.
Thank you, thank you. I
that a good
wanted
point?
to,
I went to Columbia. Right?
Mark, I wanted to give you ammunition for your point of view. I think it was illustrated perfectly by what the Swedish foreign minister said after the Paris attack, that if the Palestinian issue was not such a grievous issue, that this Paris attack might have been avoided. And so linking these two, I think, is something that continues to happen. And this is why people in America have this very distorted view. First of all, they don't know what a settlement is. They don't get the proper reporting on what's going on in Israel. And all they hear about is the poor subjugated, occupied territories. And I think Israel can solve this by applying sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. I think that's what should be done.
I think that'd be a disaster for the Jewish people.
I think
Okay,
that's the
taking
only
Can I
answer.
address your question?
I'm taking a prerogative for one moment, because I do want to ask another question, but I want, because it's important to me that the audience understand, and to the extent to which we are going to give you accurate information, I want to say one thing to Eric and one thing to Helen. I am going to check on the Elliot Abrams piece.
Please.
I'm almost positive, and only because it's hard for me to believe you're ever wrong, but I believe that I read and then spoke about the most recent piece Elliot Abrams wrote, in which he explicitly says that under Netanyahu there has been the lowest rate of growth of settlers on the West Bank.
Rate of growth is not
No,
the
no, well,
same
no,
as
li-
absolute
even
increase
abso-
in numbers.
Even absolute numbers. So what I will
You
do,
find the
I will
piece
find,
and
and
read
I
it.
will send it to you.
Please.
Okay. And number two, I said to Steve at one point, I think you're the only one of the five of us who take that position. I have great respect, and I mean this, it comes from my soul. And Steve said it beautifully. If we could have, it's not just up to the Jordan River, it's both sides of the Jordan. We know the Jabotinsky line. If we could have biblical Eretz Yisrael, that would be wonderful. But Steve is also correct that ever since 1937-38, the formal position of the Jewish community has been, we will share the land. And every time we've been given an option, we have answered, we will share the land. We want it all, but we will share the land. And the Arab world has been given the exact same opportunity, and every single time it is said, we will never share the land. And part of what the tragedy to me is, and Eric once used the term, we're not looking for a peace settlement, we're looking for an applicable divorce. I thought it was a brilliant formulation. Unfortunately, I've now come to the position that while Eric is right about what he wants, he can't have it. Because there's one of the parties will never agree to share the land.
Exactly.
Not in the near future or the long, never.
Right.
There will have to be a sea change in Arab mentality and Muslim mentality, a sea change. Or you hear what Mordechai Kedar says, if the Arabs really believe they have no choice, they will make a compromise for a period of years. But at the moment, there's no possibility that the other side, the Arab world, will share the land. And therefore, as much as I have argued for a two-state solution, as long as I've been in public, it's not possible.
Right.
Having said that, however, for me, and this is an Orthodox Jew, It's not about a biblical promise to the land. Right now it's about what Steve said. What's realistic for there to be in this real world? And God, Hashem, is patient, long-suffering and patient. God may promise us the land. He never said when. And if at a moment we can have a piece of the land, we'll take a piece of that land. So I respect your vision of all of, certainly from the Jordan to the Mediterranean, but most American Jews, and I count myself among them, as much as I believe in the Jewish tradition, it does not drive my Zionist politicism of the land.
Let me respond. First of all, I'm a Zionist. I believe Zionism is about a Jewish and democratic state in the land of Israel. And that's what it's always been about from the very beginning. Read Herzl, read Jabotinsky, read those on the left. A Jewish state, stable Jewish majority that is democratic in the commonly accepted sense of the term. The problem with what Helen is saying is she apparently doesn't believe in democracy.
Why?
Or if she does. Well, for example, I don't have any position, any problem in terms of principle with Helen's position if it's the same as Rivlin's. The president of Israel wants to extend sovereignty over the land, and he says Arabs get full rights. Full rights. Well, I think that would be disastrous. It's a principled position, and I respect it. If that's what Helen is saying, that's fine.
Well, I'm not. I'm not giving you Rivlin.
All right. If what you're saying is
is
eternal occupation, that's a different matter. But my question to Mark is, look, when I travel around, make the case, as I say, for Israel, as emphatically, as passionately as I can. What do I find? The settlement issue is very important because it's in the news, but that's not the real question. The fundamental question is, what's the end game here? What kind of a state is Israel going to be? What's it going to look like? What do its own leaders at this moment have in mind as their vision for where this is going? The real problem with the Prime Minister of Israel, I mean, I've disagreed with him on this or that and so on and so forth, is that he offers no answer. In other words, we'll manage the problem, but we won't provide an answer and we won't provide a vision. If you're going to make Israel's case, you need to be able to lay out, after all of these years, what it is that we want the Jewish state to be. And the problem with what you said is I wasn't hearing that. So if you're going to throw up your hands in frustration, you need to then take the next step and say, this is what we're going to have for the next century, because given the realities, this is the best we can do. We need to hear that. The current situation, the status quo, will not work.
Why is that? Why, no, sir, why is that? By the way, I've heard this maybe for 30 years. I've heard this is our last chance for 30 years. And another decade goes by. Why is the current situation, if the Palestinians will not make peace, why is the current situation unacceptable? And by the way, I just want everybody to remember, today there is an Arab-Israeli Supreme Court justice. Mm-hmm. That's a huge deal. And the Supreme Court justice, an Arab-Israeli Supreme Court justice, was the justice who presided over the case where the Israeli president was sent to jail, and was just the head of the Elections Commission for the last March elections. An Arab-Israeli, and that Arab-Israeli will not sing Hatikva, and nobody cares.
So I don't think no one cares.
Yeah, but well, is he removed?
It's not removed.
He's not removed. Okay.
I care a little.
Can I respond to your question?
My point is, you make it sound like the kids on college campuses are saying, "Well, Geschrei Israel today." I'm sorry.
Look at the world.
The world is anti-Semitic and wrong.
Look at the subject of this show.
But the world is wrong.
You can't have 2.5 million people under... Israel doesn't have to solve the problem because the problem comes from the Palestinian side.
Right.
But Israel needs to say, these are my terms. And...
Israel has said that.
No, it has not.
Yes, it has.
It has not. What are the borders? What are the borders of the
Those
state?
are not terms.
Eric, look at the Olmert plan.
No.
Abbas just announced within the last few days. Abbas said, "Yes, I rejected the Olmert plan that would have brought us enough land." Let me finish, Eric. Let me.
I'm asking for the Israelis to put on the table.
Abbas just said, last few days, I've rejected the Onward Plan, which called for a tunnel connecting Gaza and the West Bank. I rejected that out of hand, he said. He just admitted that. So there clearly is something to Mark's view that in the short term, the Palestinians are not coming forth with an agreement for any reasonable two-state solution. And Mark's view, I think, pardon me for saying this, I agree with you, is one that is worth thinking about. Can Israel continue to go along this way where there is no a two-state solution, there are no meaningful negotiations or discussions going on? But I'll answer the question you asked a long time ago in this broadcast, which was, why do you hear in the ether and from individuals this onus being placed on Israel, on Netanyahu, to do something to achieve a two-state solution when the other party to the divorce, as Eric's metaphor set forth, is unwilling to have a divorce? And I'll give you an answer which you may not be satisfied. I believe, and this applies to Obama, and this applies to lots of folks in the Democratic Party as well as across the others. They love Israel. They truly do. They know it's a Jewish state. They want it to succeed and be secure. But they believe, they're terrified that the demographics of the Arab population in Israel and in the region, unless there's a two-state solution, will result in a one-state where the Jews of this one state are in the minority. It is no longer a Jewish state and no longer a democracy. And they're worried about that so much.
In this paradigm.
And they're so worried about that so much.
In your paradigm, who makes it a one state?
Palestinians right now.
The Palestinians.
How do the Palestinians, because I'm saying, what if the status quo continues? The status quo continues. There is the state of Israel, and there is disputed territory, where the Palestinians, by the way, in Area A, are living virtually an autonomous life.
Right.
Well, you know, if you have a goal,
how does it become one state?
What is your goal?
How does it become one state?
I will tell you.
Answer it.
Well, he asked me. If you have the goal of a state where the people, where the children have nightmares that they're going to be stabbed on their way to go to school, they're going to have rockets coming from Gaza, etc., 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 150,000 missiles coming from the Hezbollah in Lebanon, etc. If that satisfies you, then that satisfies you.
So you don't agree
with the
status quo.
It doesn't satisfy me.
So you don't agree with the status quo.
I don't agree with the status
Because a moment ago,
quo
I thought you
because
said you
of
do
my
agree with
goal and lots of others,
Did I hear you say you agreed with me?
He didn't really.
I agreed with your belief that there might be some that it was attractive to you, but I was offering you my perspective on the reality of being an Israeli living in this way, that the status quo is unacceptable, and those in the Obama administration or other places that you say are putting too much pressure on Netanyahu. They truly want a Jewish democratic state of Israel to survive and prosper. And just look at their military and intelligence and financial contributions to Israel.
Right, look, couple comments.
No.
Congressman,
I have a
But here's where I agree with you. When you say that they're heavy-handed, and you may be right.
Okay. Do you agree with him?
Look, like it or not, Congressman, I believe strongly the status quo is going to be with us for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In that respect, we've got to make the best of it, so to speak. In other words, if we're defenders of Israel, if we're supporters of Israel, the real point is that no, this is not a desirable situation. Correct. But it's the existing situation, and there isn't much of a chance of changing it anytime soon.
We have to do two things: protect this, deal with the status quo, and fight for the vision of the future of the Jewish state of Israel that we want. We need to do both things.
As far as the vision of the future is concerned, it's fair to say that the Obama administration walked in, complete fairness to them, they walked in saying being a Zionist or being a supporter of Israel is not the same thing as supporting Likud politics. Again, for better or for worse, his counterpart for now close to 7 years has been Likud politics. So in that respect, we've seen a lot of tension between the two. American Jews, again, I'm sure overwhelmingly they voted for Obama, probably 70% last time I checked.
Close to it.
Yeah. Okay. American Jews tend to be liberal Democrats. But is there discontent with the Obama administration There's a recognition that the security assistance that's been given, as you put it, is unprecedented. I don't know if it's completely unprecedented, but it's quite positive.
It is unprecedented.
Okay, if it is, great. Even if it isn't, it's quite positive.
But it is.
But the tone of the relationship has become very testy. Okay, American Jews who are supporters of Israel are not appreciative of that testiness. As far as future vision goes, I think the real challenge goes, frankly, to Helen and her group, that most of American Jewry, excluding, Americans for Safe Israel, Cherut, what it's called, Cherut USA, Gush Emunim, excluding that group, many of whom are found within the Orthodox community and a very strong constituency there. But putting that group aside, most American Jews really do believe in a two-state solution. Most Israelis really believe in a two-state solution. That small group that does believe in permanent sovereignty, over Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip, whatever else you want to call them, they have never faced up to the challenge, not necessarily of a minority Jewish population, but what would a Jewish state look like? Say if it was 53% Jewish and 47% Arab. What does that do to the fabric, the morale, the self-identity as Jews of ruling over a population that doesn't want to be ruled over it? Now, I hear that, and I say, yes, that's the real challenge to the right, and it's never been answered. I also would say, last point, Helen, when the Arab leadership gets together and they set forth their future vision of a Jewish state, it's a binational state. Well, I can't identify with a binational state any more than I can identify with a Jewish state that is ruling over a population of 47% Arab. So we're stuck in the middle here. Stuck in the middle, again, we go back to the status quo, it's likely to be with us for an awfully long time.
Okay, I would like to say that there are many, many plans that have been put on the table in regard to how this sovereignty over Judea and Samaria would work in terms of the Arab population. So too many to go into today. However, I want to go to something Steve has said. He said it a few times about this tremendous loyalty, this tremendous devotion that the Obama administration has to Israel, the Democrats for Israel, and so on and so forth. This has not been illustrated in the fact that the president has ridden roughshod over the feelings of the entire American public by putting forward a plan with Iran, so enabling Iran to develop a nuclear bomb and releasing $150 billion to this enemy. This will certainly start a nuclear war in the Middle East, where other nations, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, will have to create their own bombs. And how this endears itself and shows affection and devotion to Israel is something that I don't comprehend.
You know what's interesting? I watch Meet the Press and all those other shows. I hate them because nobody has a chance to talk for any length of time,
right,
and nobody has a chance to respond. And no matter, and it's in very quick sound bites. And when I get you here, I really want all four of you to really have a moment to both talk and to respond to each other. But in all fairness to the show, what you've done is you've opened up an entirely new, when I only have 2 minutes left. And I can't, it's not fair to Steve not to give him a chance to respond. But it just takes the show in a direction that I didn't want it to go in. Too late. So the next time we're back,
should have addressed it earlier.
That's right. The next time we're back, although it really was not the essential. I mean, I give four of you credit. You stayed on point.
10 seconds.
Marvelously well.
10 seconds. With respect, Helen, we had a 2-hour program that Mark was kind enough to moderate on the Iran nuclear accord deal, pro and con. So when Mark says there's not enough time in 2 minutes to cover it, he's right. But I encourage everybody to look it up.
And Steve, the notion that we're going to manage the conflict and we have no choice, we're not going to manage it. And specifically, it's going to play out politically. There's already now among the Palestinians those who agree with you in the sense, or agree with both of you in the sense they say it's not going to be a two-state solution, it's going to be a one-state solution. And they are going to be arguing for equal rights. We want equal rights in the state of Israel. We want to be full citizens in the state of Israel. It is already apparent in many places, and it's going to become a major thrust. That is going to be a totally different political reality and a totally different political situation. And it's going to be many, many, many times harder for us to respond to that. Arguing for two states is one thing. Arguing why people who want equal rights in the country in which they live and are going to be denied those rights is going to be a huge burden
They
for
don't
us.
It'll
They
be
don't live in the
impossible if you
country.
declare sovereignty.
They don't live in the country.
Therefore, they say, because we have no chance for having a country of our own, we need to be made part of the country that's ruling over us, and we have to be given equal rights.
Bowie, I don't see it as a real problem, do you?
That what?
I don't think, I understand it's a very sort of strategically astute way of arguing if I'm a Palestinian. But the reality is that the state of Israel is not going to say to Palestinians on the West Bank, because you want to be Israeli citizens, we're going to let you be Israeli citizens.
It's going to be politically potent on campus in a very
No,
serious
Well,
way.
we already faced that. We faced that today, Eric. There is on campus, there is, and you're right, it's not, most campuses are, you can go on most campuses, and even if people disagree with you, they respect you and they want to hear what you have to say and they want to dialogue with you. There are a few places on American campuses where there's no opportunity for dialogue and nobody wants to hear Eric or Michael Oren or anybody else. But
All right, I'm just arguing it's a misread to say we can manage it. You gentlemen disagree. We'll
Yes.
discuss it at another
Okay.
time.
I don't know if the term is we can or we must. In other words, I just don't see it changing.
it's not it's not my preference.
Yeah.
No, it's nobody's preference. I just don't, at the moment,
An emphatic vision for a Jewish democratic state clearly laid out by the leadership of Israel would go a long way to alleviating these problems.
well, if anybody can articulate it, you can. So I'm going to be watching for you. It's been wonderful. But this could go on and on and on. All four of you. You are so kind to give us so much time. And each one of you has something very, very important to say. And to be able to come and have this kind of discussion on American television is a real gift. Steve and Helen, Steve and Eric, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with anything you want to say to Steve Bayme or Eric Yoffie or Helen Freedman or Steve Rothman. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook page, or tweet me. I always love hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.